What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. I'm Scott Challinor, and in each episode, I'm joined by a director, a CEO, a CFO, a government minister, a chairman, a president, and who knows, maybe one day, the Director General of the World Health Organization, once the whole COVID-19 outbreak is blown over and I do get a chance to get a word in edgeways, that is. The aim here is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make this country work. We discuss everything from the challenges of living in a locked down nation to changing regulation, and of course the innovation and success that makes it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current economic and political landscape here in the UK. I'm delighted today to be joined by Chris Holmes, Managing Director of Bricknells Letting Agents in Rotherham, South Yorkshire. Since it was originally established in the year 2000, Chris has seen some real changes in the residential lettings industry, with over 150 pieces of new legislation introduced between then and now. If I'd only scored as many goals as that during my high school football career, I probably wouldn't have the privilege of being involved in this conversation with Chris right now. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to Chris Holmes. So Chris, welcome. Great to have you on the programme with us today.
Thanks a lot.
Absolute pleasure to have you. Now, Chris, you're a residential lettings agency in South Yorkshire, of course, with roughly about 12 employees under you. With everything going on with the COVID-19 outbreak, how have you found the last couple of weeks?
Well, I think it's probably fair to say it's been pretty challenging. We've been obviously watching the news as the situation developed, and we took the decision beginning of last week to relocate everybody from home. That meant getting a few Chromebooks in, laptops, getting all the remote access to the CRM system. And we've been doing that for the last week now. I've been coming into the office to open the post, check the files, should the girls need anything, do any printing, sending letters out if needed. So it's been pretty challenging, to be honest. But I think, in fairness to it, I think it'll probably make us a lot better because the girls now are pretty conversant with Zoom calls and all the means of remote accessing. So I think it'll probably make us a better letting agent going forward.
Absolutely.
But it has been challenging.
Mm-hmm. It's certainly going to change the way that business operates day to day for sure, and certainly going to change things up economically.
Very much so.
Certainly getting on to the point now, Chris, I understand that when you meet with landlords in your profession, a very hot topic is often how government legislation is actually penalising those in the private rental sector. So what sort of issues, for the benefit of the listeners, are landlords facing in that respect?
I think I get a situation where landlords just say to me that they're not making any money anymore. I mean, you know, the Section 24 tax changes that came in, where they're not able to claim mortgage tax relief is hurting particularly the higher paid taxpayer. The 3% stamp duty is stunting development of people buying second homes for buy-to-let. And remember as well that the buy-to-let market probably started in about the late 90s, and those landlords were sort of 40 to 60-year-olds. Now those 40 to 60-year-olds are 60 to 80-year-olds, and probably the 80-year-olds are looking to exit the market. And I am finding that landlords are looking to sell. They've just seemed to have had enough of it all at the minute. Obviously, regulations is good because it regulates the industry. You know, the electrical safety checks coming in are going to be a good thing. But I think it's just one thing after another that just keeps hitting the situation. And as I say, landlords are just finding that they're just not making any money anymore. And at the end of the day, it is a business, and they do need to make a profit.
Absolutely. Now, regulatory compliance is, of course, vital, but I think it would be good as well to touch on how over-regulation in the sector is also causing issues and weighing down on businesses. So how would you say that that's causing problems at the moment?
Well, I mean, it's just that we seem to, I don't know, in the past we've had God knows how many housing ministers. We just seem to have a sporadic patch of regulations coming in, which means that we've got to scramble, we've got to train, we've got to learn, we've got to educate, everybody to do them. So it is quite challenging at the minute just to keep abreast of all these things that are happening. As I say, we do invest in our own agency in a lot of training, but it does really mean that we have to keep on top of the game. And if you're not a professional landlord that's been doing it for a long time, you will struggle to keep ahead of these regulations, and you will possibly fall foul of them eventually. But it is becoming quite onerous at the minute.
Absolutely, and that turnover is quite alarming, isn't it? Especially in housing ministers, because I think in the last 10 years we've had about 10, haven't we? And only 2 of those, am I right in saying, have only been in post for over 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. Obviously now the situation is the COVID-19 outbreak, and obviously we've all got to get through that. But I would like to see that there was somebody there that was going to really take the housing sector to the heart and really make a difference and make it a benefit to landlords, tenants, agents, everybody, and that it can be regulated, it can be a professional, and it can be treated with, just as it needs to be, one of the prime pillars of society, housing. It's got to be. As I say, hopefully once we get through it, we'll be able to focus on that and then move everything forward.
Absolutely, and something we should mention as well, Chris, is the fact that the RLA and the NLA did issue a joint statement recently calling for immediate action to reverse the decline in supply within the industry. What has made that necessary? What has happened in the sector to cause that? Landlords are selling more than they're buying, but what are the main issues behind that, do you think?
Well, as I say, regulations, the fact that the tax changes have impacted the bottom line. At the end of the day, landlords do need to make a profit. Profit, unfortunately, sometimes is perceived as a dirty word, but, landlords do need to, it is a business, and they do need to make that profit. Obviously, the regulations coming in, the demands of tenants as well has gone up, the expectations. That's why, as I say, it needs to be a balance to everything. The landlord and tenants' expectations all need to be balanced. And that's why, if we could really get this housing market sorted out, so it was a benefit to everybody, it would make a lot of sense. But as I say, at the end of the day, it is quite onerous being a landlord. And some people who are not professionally minded in that respect are wanting to get out. We are seeing lots of sales of rental properties going forward.
For sure, and it seems to be the case that there's far more confusion around the sector than confidence at the moment. I think that's fair to say as well, isn't it? Especially with confusion about compliance levels, but also that discussion around Section 21s as well.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously something that's at the back of people's minds. The ability to get access to your property as and when required, and if they abolish Section 21s, which, is possibly a good thing, but they do need to be able to make it so that the access is attainable through courts. I mean, they did talk about doing a particular housing court that was going to fast-track things, possession issues through the courts and things, but whether that will happen, I don't know. As I say, everything at the minute is all on hold for this COVID-19, and I just wonder how long it's going to be before things really get back to normal. I mean, the medical people were saying 6 months, I suspect, by the end of the year, and maybe things will get back to normal and things can be talked about again in the housing sector.
Yes, absolutely. Tell me, in your view, Chris, is the industry as a whole as well viewed through the lens of the London bubble, would you say?
Yeah, very much so, I think. Here in the north, in South Yorkshire, our rents are, particularly where we are, our average rent is £500 a month, £504 a month, far cry from London. So you can imagine, once you take any agency fees out, if you take any mortgage things out, there isn't a lot left. And I do think that the whole housing policy is driven or perceived through that London bubble. We're far a different place than London in the north here, very much so. Rents are a lot less. Salaries are nothing compared to the south. it's a far different place.
It is, certainly. And what hopes do you have for the sector with the spring budget coming as well, Chris? Because there must be some kind of master plan, or you'd hope so, for the government to address this issue, must there?
I don't know, to be honest. Will the government be in lockdown? I don't know. It's difficult to understand exactly what's going to happen. I did think that possibly stamp duty might be abolished at some stage. This 3% levy, I did think that might have gone, and possibly in the autumn maybe. But as I say, with all the release of funds now for all this COVID-19, I'm just trying to understand exactly where it's all going to end. And I'm not really sure if there's anything going to be given away, more like fallback. But we'll have to see what happens as the weeks and months develop, to be perfectly honest. It's very difficult to predict anything at the moment.
It is, absolutely, and it's been very disruptive, and it could well mean as well that the new Chancellor and the new Housing Minister don't have the time to thrash out any policies to really make that budget work. But I think it's important to see whether, when the budget does come along, whether there's a revision of existing, an introduction of new policies that do show that the government is serious to mend the sector. I mean, that's something that I think yourself and others within the industry would really like to see, isn't it?
I think if we, got the housing minister really took it to his heart to actually converse with people in industry like the RLA, NLA, agents, agents in towns, got out and met people and understood at the grassroots level what is happening, and then took those conversations back to Westminster and really thrashed out some common sense policies that enable the industry to thrive and move forward going for the next decade. It's important to get to know what the grassroots are doing, not only in London, but as I say, in the north as well.
Absolutely right. And landlords, through their national associations and agents as well, they all have a part to play in contributing to that introduction of policies and regulations as well, because these are the people that the government really has to be listening to, aren't they?
Very much so, very much so. I mean, our professional organisation, ALA, does converse with the government, and is really trying to hopefully influencing the way government thinks. Because, as I say, it is a balance. It's not just a vote-catching thing to get the tenants on side. You need to bring the landlords as well, and it needs to be a balanced approach to the whole housing policy.
Yes, it certainly does. Now, Chris, this podcast is very much all about the topic of leadership as well, and we've talked a little bit about already the challenges that you've had trying to steer your business through the COVID-19 outbreak. But also at the government level, we've seen some very contrasting approaches to addressing the outbreak at the same time as well. So, for example, if you look at Xi Jinping in China, if you look at Giuseppe Conte in Italy, they were very proactive in putting their countries on lockdown quite quickly, whereas it's taken us quite some time here in the UK to impose such measures. We've taken very much a less hands-on approach. We've had procedures in place, we've had money there, but in many ways we were just waiting to see what happens for the first few weeks. If we take that sort of away from times of crisis and taking that away from politics as well, in an everyday business context, what would you say your leadership style errs more towards, Chris? Do you prefer to just jump in straight in, get on top of things, or do you tend to let things play out a bit, see how matters develop, and then take any action that's necessary?
Well, I think our first priority was the safety of our staff, to be perfectly honest. And that meant that we were needing to lock down the office, get people working from home. We're very conscious of the financial implication, the employment implications of our tenants, and that they possibly have problems in respect of making rent payments. So we are very amenable to help and assist in every which way we can, and we're prepared to listen. I think communication is the key. We've sent letters out to our landlords. Anybody of our landlords that are 80 plus or 65 plus or needs help and are housebound, then we're here to help. It's very much, it's a community project at the minute. We are a local letting agent in South Yorkshire. We have tenants, we have landlords, and we have staff. and we all need to be communicating with each other. All the girls are on a Zoom call at 9 o'clock in the morning and see what we've got. I'm sending letters out if there's any landlords needing help or tenants needing help. So it's very much we're all in it together. Let's have how we can see we can help each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And with everything that's going on in mind, but also the challenges facing the industry that we've discussed already, what advice would you give to somebody who is looking to start up a business in your field, Chris?
To start up a letting agency, or to become a landlord?
To start up a letting agency, or both even. I think it would be quite nice to actually hear the advice that you give to both of those individuals. So we'll start with somebody who's maybe looking to start up their own letting agency business to begin with.
I think it's very difficult at the minute to start up on your own to organically grow. I think if you were looking to start up a letting agency business, I would look to acquire a letting agency business, because I'm sure that agents, just like landlords, some of the agents are feeling the pinch. We've obviously had the tenant fee ban. Letting agents with possibly a portfolio of about 100 properties might struggle, financially. And it might be that this is the final straw now, this COVID-19, and it's possibly, I would look to try and acquire somebody rather than try and set up right from scratch. As a landlord, again, there are landlords looking to exit the market. There are investors looking to enter the market. Investors are always looking for the below market value price, which isn't necessarily compatible with what landlords want to release it for. But there are bargains to be made out there. As I say, we do sourcing agreements where we look to source properties for investors that are good buy-to-let properties. So, yeah, I mean, there is opportunities out there to be a landlord. Just be aware of the regulations and, ideally tie up with a good agent that will be able to guide you through all the pitfalls. Not easy out there.
Definitely not, Chris. But what you did bring up there quite interestingly was also the ban on letting fees as well. And that's something I think we can talk about for the benefit of the listeners, especially because we've heard sort of data from the likes of Belvoir, for example, larger letting agents here, that they've essentially managed to shrug it off and they're doing quite well. But for those smaller operators within the industry, that may not necessarily be the case.
No, I think if you just imagine, do the numbers. If you have a portfolio of 100 properties and your average rent is £500 a month, then you're not bringing in an awful lot of income to pay for an office, possibly a salary, and there isn't much left. So it does hurt. That's why I said earlier that, people perhaps perceive everything through the London bubble where rents are substantially more. Whereas, in South Yorkshire, the North East, the North West, we don't live in that bubble. And it is hard to make money. Very hard. And you have to watch your costs, really watch your costs and trim your costs and review your costs every minute of every day to make money.
Absolutely. So the key for landlords, especially in terms of retaining them within the sector, is very much making sure that they do have a return on their investments, isn't it, basically?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. Otherwise, there's no point doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Chris, we've obviously talked about the COVID-19 outbreak, and we've talked about good and effective leadership directing through that, especially within your industry. With that in mind, do you think that good and effective leadership on a business level especially is as celebrated as much as it should be in this country? Because when we think of good leadership, when we look at political figures, we look at celebrities, and these are people who are very much in the public eye, very much receive praise and criticism as due. But at a business level, quite often, good and effective leadership goes uncredited. It goes unseen, doesn't it?
Well, it's what we do, I think. It's, being a leader of a business, certainly in lettings, the only thing that we have is our people. And that's why we invest heavily in our people. We invest heavily in training, looking after them, making sure they're abreast of everything. And it's so important to be able to support them in times like this, to make sure that they're safe, and that they're supported in all the things they need. As I say, I'm in the office now. If they need a file out of the thing, then I'm here to do that. But it's what we do. We have to do it. And particularly now, it's so important to get through this bad time.
It certainly is. I'm going to just go back to also your review article as well, Chris, because for those who haven't read it, I think you mentioned in that you'd seen a lot of real changes between starting in the industry and now. I think there's over 150 pieces of new legislation that have come into the sector in that time. When you were starting out within the industry, did you imagine that you would have to grapple with such difficulties?
No, I don't think anybody really thought that too far ahead, to be perfectly honest. I think I don't think anybody thought that too far ahead. But it's certainly, gas safety and all these things are really important things to do. I mean, the things that I still have a little bit of an issue with is, why don't we put carbon monoxide detectors on every property, irrespective? And obviously the electrical safety checks as well, which hopefully are going to come in, make a lot of sense.
Absolutely, because you also say in the piece as well, very specifically, that all of that regulation is in itself a good thing, and it's very, very long overdue, but it is very much getting landlords entangled in bureaucracy, really, isn't it?
Yeah, but, we are letting agents. We are professionals. And, in many respects, we're proud of what we do. We want to get it right. So for me, I welcome the regulations. As I say, I do think that, sometimes they're somewhat disjointed. But certainly if you're not a professional letting agent and you've inherited your mother's house and you're letting it out, you'll never keep abreast of all these regulations. And you will fall foul of them at some stage. So it is difficult, but regulations in itself is a good thing. I just wish that somehow it was all joined up to come to a conclusion where we had a professional industry going forward.
Yes, absolutely, and I think that's something that the government should definitely look at doing once the COVID-19 outbreak clears. That should really be the end game that we're looking toward there. So we talked about some of the challenges that you've had to grapple with then, Chris, since you started out in the industry. On a more positive note, could you give us maybe one or two personal highlights from your time at Bricknells so far?
My goodness, that's a question. I mean, as I said, the girls doing the training and all coming out with certification. We do a lot on social media where we have various things that are happening. We're moving in a National Health Service nurse on Friday. We're taking around a hamper of stuff just to say a really big thanks from all the staff. There's lots of things that happen on a daily basis, I suppose, on a weekly basis, but I can't honestly think of anything that sticks out in my mind at the minute.
It's interesting there that you mentioned training, because I think in a lot of other industries, Chris, there's the skills gap is something that's very well documented. Of course, there are issues with recruitment in various sectors. Is that necessarily the case for your line of work as well, or do you not really encounter such issues?
I mean, it's so important to get the training right so that you can actually operate your business within the realms of just getting it right, because it's so easy to fill in the form wrong, and if it went to the court, it would be get thrown out. So, the training and making sure that we do things right is so important. And it's something that we do every 6 months. We reinforce. The girls go through individual learning plans. We do skills matrix to assess where they are. We look at continually reviewing their progress. and motivating them to ascend up the scale to get better and better and better.
Absolutely, because in terms of leadership, this training is about making sure that this next generation of people are going to be the next leaders within the industry, isn't it? And that's also incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. I don't want to be here for the next 20 years. So we have to be bringing forward people who are able to take the business forward. In the next term, the next long term. So it's important that this training is kept up and the skills are reinforced so that we're able to bring the next generation through.
Absolutely, because fundamentally, becoming a leader in any industry is very much a learning process. Like some might believe, people who are great leaders in what they do, leading figures, they're not just born with those qualities, are they? It's something that has to be developed and really honed throughout time.
Yeah, I think so. We start them off. We start the girls off on a skills matrix just to assess where they are, and then put the learning plan in place so that they can improve where they are, where they do need improvement. Then we monitor that, and it's motivational for them as well because they can see themselves moving up the the ladder, as it were, and getting better and better and better, and they want to improve. They want to improve. So for us, that's fundamental. And as well as managers, it means that your staff are able to, self-motivate, work on their own. And obviously, at the moment in crisis like we're all at home working, it's paying dividends because they all know what they're doing.
Absolutely. And you talk about motivation there as well, Chris. With yourself being in a leadership position, what would you say are the big motivators for you personally?
I think it's personal communication, to be honest. To be able to... I often say you can't criticise without praising people. And so when people do a good job, tell them they do a good job. It doesn't need to be a great big thing. Just a hand on the shoulder, a pat on the back means the world to some people. And it means the world to a lot of people. So, for me, it's that personal communication, I think, is the most important thing.
Absolutely. And I think that personal communication links in very well to essentially a workplace culture, doesn't it? Creating a culture of positivity, a culture where everybody's speaking to each other. So you can really, therefore, get the best out of everybody around you. That's really, really important as well. Yeah,
it's teamwork. It's everybody supports everybody. If one seems to need help, then people will pick them up and dust them down and move them forward. So it's actually creating that culture in the office. And it works. It works.
Absolutely. And as you say, it's really paying dividends now when everybody might not be in one place physically, but everybody is working and making sure that communication is maintained, especially now. That's massive, isn't it?
Yeah, the Zoom call in the morning sets the tone for the day. And then the girls can get on with things. We do pair the girls up. And the girls look after a portfolio of properties. So whilst if one's ever off or sick or whatever, then landlords can get in touch with the other girl that's still in the office. So it does work, and it's as I said, particularly now, it's everybody working from home.
Absolutely. And we've talked about the procedures that are in place at Bricknells at the moment. We've talked about that workplace culture. We've talked a little bit about your own leadership style as well, Chris. Would you say that there are maybe any figures within the industry or anybody of prominence that's maybe had an influence on your leadership style in that way?
Hard to say, to be honest. I mean, I've been 30 years in construction. On building sites before I came to the letting industry. And I've met various managers over the years who've taught me various things. So there's none that stand out, but that's where my organisational abilities and motivational things have come in. It's from 30 years in the construction industry overseas and in the UK.
Excellent. And you think that it's quite easy, therefore, to essentially transfer skills across both of those industries, Chris? Or would you say it's a little bit more challenging than that?
I think so, because at the end of the day, it's a people business. You get things done through people. And therefore, you need to be able to motivate people to be able to do things. And those skills of personal communication, motivational skills are transferable and can be learned.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Chris, I am conscious of running out of time, but before we do look about wrapping things up, do give me an idea of what you imagine the next year will hold for yourself, for Bricknells, and what you hope to achieve in that time, not just through the outbreak, but also beyond that too.
I think that once we get through this I think this bad time is a holding time at the minute. It's looking at our costs, trying to trim that, making us leaner and meaner. I think once we're through this, I think that we will be spending a lot of time during this lockdown period in respect of communicating with the marketplace, a lot of social media posts, so that when we get through this, hopefully people will remember us at the back of our mind. And when we come out of it, then we'll need to start actively marketing to try and get more properties under our belt, under our agency. We'll have come out with a leaner, meaner machine on the cost side. I'm hoping that the market will then start coming back in respect of property sales, and as a consequence then possibly landlords looking to get back into the market and hopefully to increase our income. See what the government come up with in respect of the autumn statement, and let's just get through it and see where we are. But we will be concentrating this lockdown period on lots of marketing, looking at our costs, so that when we come out of this, then we're ready to go out of the blocks at a rate of knots.
Absolutely, that has to be the focus for business at the moment, but also we all have to hope that the government doesn't essentially neglect the industry, and once that statement does come out, it has remembered it, it knows what needs to be done, and it can essentially pick up where it left off in the industry and really take that all forward. Chris, I have to say it's been really insightful and also an absolute pleasure having you on the programme and learning from you today, and I think it would also be fantastic to have you back on the programme in a few months' time just to see how things have panned out and look at all of this retrospectively. So once again, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and speak to myself and also share this information for the benefit of the listeners.
Many thanks. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure, Chris. I hope you all enjoyed my interview with Chris, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Bricknells Letting Agents continues to raise standards. Now, if you've not heard it before, coming up is Jonathan White's exclusive interview with England's hero of the 1966 World Cup, Sir Geoff Hurst. Now, Sir Geoff, as well as playing for both West Ham and Chelsea, remains the only man to this day to have scored a hat-trick in a World Cup final when England beat West Germany 4-2 at the old Wembley Stadium back in 1966. I hope you enjoy listening just as much as Jonathan enjoyed speaking to Sir Geoff. Here it is now.
We're now joined, though, by former England footballer and still the only man to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final, Sir Geoff Hurst. Thank you very much for coming on today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good afternoon.
And perhaps I should start and get it over and done with. I know you must be bored with it, and you've probably been asked 1,000 times. But when you got out for a duck playing for Essex, Geoff, what was going through your head at the time?
Well, of course, that's not one of the most asked questions I get. Oh, there are one or two people who are very familiar who do Google me, who realise that I did score nothing for Essex. My only game for Essex first team when we played against Lancashire in Liverpool, a place called Egbert in Liverpool, many, many years ago, 1962, I think that was. So I didn't, I didn't really feel it at the time. It was lucky to be playing, I guess. There were one or two injuries. But the problem that I had was really messing about between the two sports. That was very detrimental to me over that period of time, being stuck between the two sports.
And I think for those that don't know, there's another world that might exist where Sir Geoff Hurst was a first-class cricketer and not perhaps a footballer. But whether it's business or cricket or football, obviously the importance of leadership, it can't be understated, no matter what form that comes in. when you were at West Ham, Jeff, and when Ron Greenwood first came along, he made obviously some pretty radical changes. Was this a man that genuinely inspired confidence the first time you'd meet him?
Absolutely. I mean, he was simply a fantastic coach or teacher, if you like, of football. And the quite always mentioned when we talk about Ron Greenwood, Harry Redknapp, who was played under him and has been very successful as a player and the manager over many, many, many years. He's come across many coaches, of course, and managers during his time over years, I guess. He would still say that Ron Greenwood is the best coach he'd worked with. So you're very fortunate. I think you think you're lucky when you come across, if you have a great teacher at school and a great coach as we had in Ron Greenwood, and of course a great manager in Sir Alf Ramsey. So to come across people like that of that calibre can have a huge influence on your career, of course, and then your life, and that's quite purely the case.
Absolutely. And in those early days at West Ham, with a manager like Ron there, it's also important to have confidence with your other players, and of course they become your friends. Who did you look to at the time when to inspire confidence in yourself? Was it Peters?
I think probably, I was very fortunate to play with the calibre of the players I did. Again, extremely fortunate to play with the captain of England and West Ham and Martin Peters, who was a fantastic player. And as far as Martin's concerned, I think sometimes he didn't quite get the recognition he deserved and what a wonderful player he was. In terms of inspiring confidence, I always probably say that the biggest influence for me, I guess, would be the captain, Bob Noor. Although he was only about 8 months older than me, he graduated through the system probably 3 or 4 years earlier. He played for England in 62, 4 years before the final when I played. And so he was more, looked upon him more as a senior player, if you like, not as a guy with the same age group as me. And I looked at how he trained, how he acted, how he behaved, and how he played. And so he would say, I would also say he was a big influence on me. One thing I would say about leadership, I do understand clearly in all walks of life, leadership is at the top, is absolutely vital for a business, a football team, in any walk of life to be successful. And it's quite evident. I was in the motor trade for a long time as well, selling car warranties to car dealerships. And you could almost tell when you walked into the business, many of the car dealerships, you could almost tell from the moment you walked in by initial reaction, people came and welcomed you, that the business was well run or conversely not well run at all. And so I understand the value and quality of leadership. And that's why I'm very fortunate to be involved in my career in those early days with two great leaders in Ron Greenwood and Alf Ramsey.
Absolutely. And since you've already brought him up, Jeff, I think it'd be remiss not to go a little bit further with that. But obviously, after at West Ham, your playing came to the attention of Sir Alf Ramsey. Now, there's a man I'm sure when you walked into a room, you knew who was in charge. When it came to managing that England team, what was his style like, Jeff?
Well, the first thing I say about Alf Ramsey, he's probably over my life the most powerful influence who had on me as a person. Naturally, it happens to an extent because he's got your whole career in his hand. Whether he picks you for England or he doesn't pick you, it can have a great impact on your career and, of course, your life. But in that era I was involved for 6 or 7 years, it was quite clear who was the boss. He was quite very, very strict. Probably at a time, maybe overly strict, but at a time you probably wouldn't necessarily get away with it in today's football because it's changed dramatically in how you deal with players then and players now. But he was the most powerful man I came across, and very few people. And he was quite ruthless in getting people out who didn't want to be part of a group, part of a team. It is important that if you've got a group of people, and that's in any walk of life, they're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and you don't have anybody that's griping or moaning about the system. And if you've got people like that in your organisation, one thing I have learned, and I've taken it on in my life, my family, you've got somebody in the group who doesn't want to be part of it, you get them out. And Alf, I think, was quite ruthless with that in his staff. And I think that's one of the most serious things I think I've learnt over a long period of time.
And is there, do you think, a specific moment? I'm sure there's probably dozens, but is there a specific moment, Jeff, you could perhaps pick right now that did show those qualities in Sir Alf so sharply?
Yes, I think for me, certainly, I think there are instances of players who you thought would be in the team or certainly in the squad, and surprising they were not. There was no necessary reason for it, but looking back, I do think perhaps they were people that Alf didn't think wanted to be part of the group. So that's for me. In terms of my personal view, I think that it looked prior to the World Cup that I was going to be playing in it. Only a few games before I was playing, and I played with Jimmy Greaves in a game against Yugoslavia only a couple of months before the final. And it looked at that stage as if I was going to be playing in the team. But in a couple of more friendly games before the final in Poland and Norway, I think, and Denmark, I played 2 of the 4 games, and I probably didn't quite replicate my form that I'd been showing at West Ham and in the early couple of games for England. And he left me out in the first game of the World Cup against Uruguay. He started off with Jimmy Greaves and Roger Hunt. So I had an impact of thinking at that stage I looked like I was going to play, and didn't start because of just a lack of form. I didn't play quite well enough to justify my position. And somewhat fortuitously, I only got back in the team because of a nasty gash to shin on Jimmy Greaves' leg.
And I think what you've said there, Jeff, actually does sum that up really well. And more than that, whilst it's important to have that someone in charge with those qualities, it's almost useless if there isn't a strong and unified team behind them. And there really must have been moments, Jeff, maybe there weren't, but let us know, in that 66 competition, the prolonged pressure on all of you, the weight of a nation, did it get to you?
Oh, not for me personally, no. I think, and I don't, not for me, not for a second. I think I was just happy to be involved in the squad initially. Not at all. You're not aware of the magnitude of the occasion, really, looking back out. So I never really felt, people talk about pressure a lot and it's there, and players talk about it in life. I didn't really necessarily feel any great pressure during the time I was there. And what is also important to say about Alf Ramsey, the people he left behind that were left in the squad after he'd moved 1 or 2 players out, the squad were a bunch of very hard-nosed, professional, top-quality people. And that was, again, the leadership that Al showed. He got people in together that were very, very strong personally. And I think that was part of the success we had. We were I always describe our group as hard-nosed professionals. We have some great players, but overall they were great hard-nosed professional players. And great quality people who we've kept in contact with, over the years.
And Jeff, I've got to ask, and I'm not making this up, I've genuinely heard that people do ask you whether or not you realise there were people on the pitch at that moment. I imagine you were busy on something else.
Well, I did some theatre shows last year. They've gone fairly well, and we're going to do a series of theatre shows, in fact, starting this week, over the next 2 or 3 months. And at the end of the theatre shows, we have about 20 minutes where we allow the people in the audience to ask questions. And I won't mention both. They're too long to talk about both questions. The other one's a really stupid one. It's too long for me to tell you. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the other ridiculous question I get asked, did I realise there were people on the pitch? And of course, I jokingly say, yes, I was just about to shoot to score the goal. And I looked round, put my foot on the ball, and looked round for a little while and said, oh dear, there are 6 or 7 people running on the pitch. So I've been asked that once at one of the theatre shows. So make a joke about that and saying, yes, I put my foot on the ball and waited to just have a glance round, you know.
Maybe it does prove there are things such as stupid questions, really.
Oh, yeah, there certainly are. I've got another one which I won't bore you with. It won't be too long to tell you. I was in a Jersey, or Channel Line, Jersey or Guernsey, 2 or 3 years ago, and most stupid, irrelevant questions, absolutely nothing to do with football whatsoever, which was absolutely, but I can use that now because it is quite funny.
Well, maybe another time then, but we...
well, you want me? I can tell you if you want. You got time? I can tell you if you want.
Jeff, go on. Go. I think it would be silly if I said no at this point.
Okay, so I was doing at a dinner in the Channel Lines, 300 or 400 people, black tie dinner, guest of honour. On this occasion, I was speaking for about 20 minutes, then allowing questions from the audience at the end of the evening. And there was usual football questions, and then all of a sudden I heard somebody at the back who asked a question. I didn't quite hear what he said. He didn't have the microphone with him, so I said, I didn't hear what he said. Can you please give this chap the microphone so I can hear clearly what he said? So the chap had the mic, and he said, when a turtle loses its shell, is it naked or is it homeless?
Right. What a question. What a question.
I think that would be definitely in the stupid category, wouldn't it? So we had a laugh about that.
You've got to have a patient of a saint, I think, sometimes to put up with things like that. But then again,
I found it amusing. I just found it amusing. In fact, some of the audience found it highly amusing as well. So it did make me laugh that day.
If you can put up with my questions, you can probably put up with anything. But there would have become a point, though, Jeff, I think you were a young man when obviously this happened, when you must have realised that teammates, began looking at you for leadership. Is that something that occurred to you, or did you just realise that by one way or the other, people actually begin to look up for you for inspiration?
Well, possibly. That's never really struck me until you've actually mentioned it now, quite frankly. It's a new question. Does anybody look up to me? I'm sure perhaps there are people who pay you compliments of fans of West Ham and Stoke, and of course England fans who I think probably it would be very immodest of me to suggest that I felt that somebody was looking to me for inspiration.
You don't have to, but I will.
It's okay for a third party to do it. Perhaps that may have been the case over the years. People look at you and maybe it has a helpful effect. But I do think you how you behave and set examples on and off the pitches, people must realise that has an influence. How you react and behave to situations on and off the field surely probably has an impact to younger players coming into the team latterly. Yeah.
And with that, looking at football today, is there anybody that you think particularly on the field or the sidelines that strikes you as someone with those qualities that you could identify in a natural leader?
Well, current players, you mean?
Oh, players, managers, anybody that you look to today, really?
Well, I think some of the outstanding. I think the best example about a leader at the moment is Klopp at Liverpool. He has been absolutely fantastic to acquire the players and get them to their attitude is absolutely fantastic. They're great players, but there's more than just being good players in football. It is have a good player with a fantastic attitude, and their willingness to work for each other and the team is absolutely outstanding. Hence these unbelievable results. There are, and the great players not always succeed as individuals, or probably even certainly as a team if you haven't got the right attitude alongside it. And they're probably, and that comes through the leadership. That's not just luck.
Absolutely.
That's absolute leadership. He'd be the best example, of course, in football terms today. Easily. And of course, but going back not that long ago, Alex Ferguson. It's just absolutely. You've got to take him as the first example, because Klopp's only done this over a period of time, a short period of time. But if you look at the 26, 27 years that Alex Ferguson did with Manchester United, and subsequently since he's gone, how they are not doing so well. He's the best example of management we've probably ever seen, and I don't think anybody will see the light of that kind of leadership again. It's absolutely astonishing.
And do you think, could you imagine Sir Alf or even Ron Greenwood managing teams today?
Yes, I think so. I think yes, no question at all. I think Ron Greenwood. Yeah, the answer, straightforward answer is yes.
Good answer.
The straightforward answer is yes. I can elaborate as much as you want, but the straight answer is absolutely categorically yes.
And with and I know if we could talk about this probably for the next hour or so, but I'm conscious of the time. Looking back through your playing career, perhaps especially your time for England, who was it that struck you more than anyone else on the pitch that displayed qualities of not just leadership but companionship and level-headedness that you think that have stuck with you all these years later?
Well, I think I was very fortunate, and I wouldn't pick any one player out. I think looking at that,
so many,
and that's why we were successful, because we had so many showing all those qualities that you just mentioned throughout the team. I think that was outstanding, and it's an opportunity to talk about all of them in that breath. And there was nobody, and going back from an earlier question for me, all hard-nosed professionals, good teammates, good socially, and that's why we kept in touch with each other on our golf days every year, up until about 5 years ago, of course, with the sadly dwindling numbers. We still got on, our wives got on all together all those years later. It didn't just finish after 66. That reunion, that camaraderie, that team spirit, getting on with each other lasted for a long time. And I wouldn't, when you put those questions and how you categorise those, I would pick every one of the 11 players who you put in that category that were like that. There was nobody else. They were all outstanding. And I think that was a big part. I can't stress how big a part that was. And I've said that many times, for the success of the team. We have some great players. We have some great players, of course. But without the attitude alongside that, going back to an earlier question, we wouldn't have been as ultimately as successful.
Exactly. Without that, the whole will never be greater than the sum of its parts. But with it,
yes, the word is team. The word is team.
Absolutely.
And I always use the word team when I talk. Sometimes together, everyone achieves more, and that's the same in any walk of life. That's fundamental.
And lastly, Jeff, looking if you were to give advice, and whether this is in sport or business or indeed any other walk of life, what would you identify, if you can, as the key tenet that you can't go without in terms of leading a team, no matter what that team is?
Single-mindedness, dedication to the job, thinking about that role, that job in leadership all the time. It's a huge part of your life. I don't think you can switch off when you're in business at the top level or sport at the top level. You may, have a couple of weeks holiday, but I'm even sure if these top managers and leaders in all walks of life are away on holiday on a beach somewhere warm, I'm sure they will not switch off for 2 weeks and completely not think about their role as the boss of an organisation. And I think you're completely focused. You're always thinking about things, thinking about improvements, and it's just dedication and tuning your life to being successful.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, on that point, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Very good nice to have a talk about this and just go over the past and just refresh my own memory about the quality of the players I grew up with.
Excellent. Another time, it would be great to talk again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
As always, it has been a pleasure both listening to and learning from our guests. I and Jonathan hope you all enjoyed listening, and until next time, myself and Jonathan are off to the Westminster Arms to raise a glass to raising standards. Or at least we would be if all of the pubs weren't closed as a result of the outbreak. So unfortunately, Jonathan's front room will just have to do for now. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.